Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, and a big thank you to Farju, who messaged me recently in Prague. And he told me that he was a little unsure whether to email me or not. And he nearly met me at the Adobe Summit last year. But he said he knew I was busy and he didn't want to intrude because he wanted to give me a little time and space. And of course, I replied to his email straight away. And after a few emails back and forth, he said to me, there are many people that practice what they preach now, but you're certainly one of them. And this got me thinking, because there are many people out there saying how important it is to help one another, but it's actually all about them. And these people make it about themselves and are incredibly unapproachable. And I never want to be that guy or lose sight of what we've created here with this Daily Tech Podcast, because I honestly just see myself as a facilitator. I set up a conversation, ask a few questions, get the guests to share their insights, I share mine, and then, most importantly, I believe, throw it out to you, the listener. And that is the way that it will always be. So, a heartfelt, genuine thank you to Farju for your incredible kind words. And I promise to meet you for a beer at next year's Adobe Summit, assuming it takes place, of course. But for anyone else listening, if you're thinking, I'd love to email Neil and just ask him a question, but I feel a bit nervous, don't feel that way. I'm the easiest guy in the world to reach. And I promise you, I am very approachable. So keep those messages coming in. And rather poignantly, on that same topic, I cannot wait for you to hear today's interview, because I've invited David Allison onto the podcast, and he is the founder of the Valuegraphics database. Now, I know that I throw 30 episodes a month to you all, and you probably don't get to listen to each and every one. You probably dip in and out of which industries or which technology appeals to you. But I implore you, everybody, to listen to this one, especially if you're interested in using technology to change the world for the better. Because in nearly 1,200 interviews on this podcast, this was one of the few where the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I thought, man, this guy gets it. His passion comes across for the subject, and I actually want to help him spread his inspirational message far and wide too. Because today we're going to explore the impacts that technology is having on each and every one of us. And I think we're going to go through a few areas that you would never have thought of before. And like I said, his passion for what he does really comes across. And such an engaging storyteller as well. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Vancouver so we can speak with David Allison, founder of the Valuegraphics database. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me over. It's great to be here. My name is David Allison. I'm a human behavior expert and a pioneer of what we call values thinking. We help organizations of all kinds, for-profit and not-for-profit, understand the audiences that they're trying to do things for, whether those are internal audiences or external audiences. You know, the first step of any journey for anyone is to understand, who are we doing this for? And that's what we've been focused on.
Now, this is a daily tech podcast, but also it's a big part of it is the human stories behind that. And one of the reasons I'm excited to get you on the podcast today is you've been on quite a journey, and also a best-selling author, internationally acclaimed speaker, amongst other things. So can you tell me a little bit more about how your journey actually left you questioning the fundamental concept of marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I spent all my life, ever since I was a kid, trying to figure out what I wanted to do for a living. I was attracted to the notion of advertising and marketing. I don't know why. I was a weird kid, I guess. And then I went to school and I went to work. I got my dream job. I worked in an ad agency. And then I got promoted and I worked in another ad agency. This is back when we had these things called ad agencies that sort of don't really even exist so much anymore. And gradually that path kept moving forward. I left my last employer about 30 years ago and started freelancing as a copywriter. I'd always been on the management side of things, so I had this creative background and this account management side of my experience. And then I started getting busier and busier and busier, and so I started my own agency and started hiring people, and we got up to as many as 30 people at one point in this very weird, specialized little niche that my company focused on all over the world. What we did is we would help real estate developers who were building resorts or huge condominium towers or new little villages anywhere. We'd help them figure out who was going to come and buy stuff there, or rent or lease or whatever it might happen to be. So our job was quite, there was a lot of risk, and there was a lot of money being put on the table by these guys. You build a condominium tower, it's 300-400 million Canadian dollars. I don't know what that translates to where your listeners are sitting, but it's a lot of money. So getting the audience right was a big part of what we had to do, is to try and understand who's coming to buy these incredibly expensive units of production, I suppose, if you want to refer to it in broad terms. So we would do this, and then we would figure out who these people were. We'd have these little stories we'd tell ourselves. Sometimes we'd even write them up about Bob and Sally, who were living in the suburbs, and they were downsizing to they're getting out of their single family home and moving to a stacked, livable environment, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd build these campaigns and spend a couple $1 million helping people understand this is what this place was all about. And we always did well because the market just kept going up and up and up. And then one day, 2 or 3 years later, after we'd spent all that money and time, there'd be the opening ceremony. And we'd go and stand there and look around and see who had bought in these places that we had been trying to get Bob and Sally to come and buy. And there was very rarely a single Bob or Sally in the room. It was all these other people who didn't resemble the people we thought were going to come at all. And this kept happening over and over and over again. But, it was successful. We sold the stuff. So we kind of just shrugged and carried on. And then when I sold the company and left and decided what I wanted to do next, that's the problem I wanted to solve. Why is it we were spending millions of dollars talking to people who weren't showing up? And who were these people that were showing up? There was a fundamental flaw in the system there. And so that's what we focused on.
And one of the things that really caught my attention when I was researching what you created here and what you focused on was your Robin Hood strategy, which seems to be right at the core of every aspect of your business. So,
well, I mean, just to put a bow on that previous story I was telling, what we ended up determining is that those folks we'd been talking to, we've been using demographics and psychographics as a way to try and understand our audiences. And so we'd build these profiles based on demographic and psychographic information, and then that's how we would build our campaigns and do our targeting and spend all our money. What we found when we started doing research, we're now up to 500,000 surveys from around the world. And we've built the world's very first global data set of what everybody on the planet actually cares about and what they value. And our information is in 4 big buckets: values, wants, needs, and expectations. So we have 500,000 surveys all over the planet. We're accurate in 180 countries now, with more accuracy than you need for a PhD from Harvard. So this is hardcore data collected in a very, very specific way that's never been done before. So we now are able to look at this miniature model of the world that we've built, this miniaturized replica of the population of the planet, and ask it questions. And one of the first questions we asked is, how often do baby boomers resemble each other? We keep spending all this money trying to talk to baby boomers. So how's that look? And so we went in and we sliced off the baby boomers and said, well, let's see how similar are they to each other? And baby boomers only agree with each other on anything, on the 430 different metrics that we've measured anywhere in the world. Baby boomers only agree with each other 13% of the time. So that means if you're going to target baby boomers, you're going to be wrong 87% of the time. And that's if you do everything perfectly and you manage to get a full 13% ROI on a dollar or an hour that you've devoted to the task. And you're not going to do everything perfect because we're human. So if you're really, really good at your job, maybe you get a 10% ROI on your dollar or your hour that you spent targeting baby boomers. And the further we digged, we could not find a single demographic label that made any sense as a tool anymore. Men and women don't agree with each other, or men don't agree with men, women don't agree with women. People who earn £50,000 a year are all different from each other. People who have a MBA are all different from each other. So using these labels to create a profile and say the people we're chasing are men who are 18 to 24 years old who earn £50,000 a year, you're taking a whole lot of zeros of zero similarity and adding them up. And so you're getting a bigger zero, and then you're throwing millions of dollars at it and hoping that something sticks. And that's why we were seeing these people show up who we hadn't talked to. We were wasting 90% of our money talking to other folks. So what we've done with this data set is we now can go into it and we can also profile people based on the one thing that we've been missing in the marketing world. And that's understanding how to change people's behaviors tomorrow. There's all kinds of information out there about how they're behaving today, how they feel today, what their emotions are. You can scrape the social net and say what they're saying about your brand online, all this other stuff, but it's all just about what they're doing now. How do we get them to change so that they'll do what we would like them to do tomorrow? So now you have to go into the world of sociology. And in sociology, it's a basic, fundamental, time-tested tradition. This one sentence: what we value determines what we do. So if you know what a group of people value, you know how they're going to behave. So you can say, wow, if we give stimulus A, they'll do this. And if we give them stimulus B, they'll do that. As an entire group. This has never been done before because the technology did not exist for us to build this kind of a data set that would allow this to happen. So now we can abandon demographic stereotypes like baby boomers hate the environment and millennials like avocado toast, and men are stupid, or young people are bad drivers, or all of these ridiculous things that we have in our head because it's the best we had to work with. Well, now we've got this incredibly accurate data about what masses of people, what buttons you need to push to get them to change their behaviors, so that you can use that information as a way to build products and services and brands and ideas and messages. All of which takes me back to your question in a very long-winded way about the Robin Hood strategy. So what we do, and the reason that I get so excited about this, and I've been working so hard for the last 4 or 5 years to get this out there in the world, is that we can change the behavior of masses of people. So for a company, that's really cool. They like that. And they're willing to pay for that. And then we take that money and we use it to change the behavior of masses of people for the betterment of the planet. So we don't go and do that work, but we go and give our data to organizations that are out there trying to make global change happen. So for example, our first big pro bono job was for a group based out of Washington, D.C. called the Environmental Defense Fund. And this is what's called a multi-cause fund. So they raise money to help all kinds of different things that have to do with poor old planet Earth and the damage that we've wreaked upon her since we've been here. So they're now using Valuegraphics profiling to understand the audiences of people who are their donors, so that they can talk to them about the things they actually care about, instead of talking to them based on demographic stereotypes and assumptions based on past behavior. They can now say to them, listen, we know that you really value family, for example. So let me tell you how your donation is going to impact your family and the families of other people around the world. We know what to say now. We know how to pull those triggers and how to get these behaviors to change. So the Robin Hood strategy is to quite literally take money from the corporations who want to have this information about how to be more powerful and use it for these other organizations who are trying to make the world better for all of us.
And I'm curious, just going back to a point you made a few moments ago about all those data points and all those stereotypes about different generations are all completely wrong now, got no place in the modern world. What is it that's changed us?
Oh, wow. It's such a fascinating story. Technology has made us all more similar to each other than we've ever been before. You can sit in your office in Birmingham, where I know you're located, and you and I can have a conversation, and we could be watching the same TV shows, and we might be connected because we've read some of the same books or seen or listened to some of the same podcasts, or information is not kept in geographic or demographic clusters anymore. The whole world is available to everybody always. It's an absolute plethora of opportunity and curatorial possibility that we're all presented with. I can make my life whatever I want my life to be. I don't have to behave in a certain way anymore because I'm a white male who's 55 years old and I'm middle class. And there was a time in history before technology connected us and gave us this ability to curate our lives, where we did have very strict rules about what we could and couldn't do. And social shaming would keep us in our place. If you were a young woman and you hadn't at a certain point in history, if you were a young woman in a village in a rural part of a country somewhere and you hadn't started having babies and contributing to the population of your village by a certain age, there was clearly something wrong with you and you needed to be fixed. And if you were a young man and you weren't out, spearing the enemy or bringing home the mastodon for dinner, then you weren't living up to your end of the bargain. And weirdly, for some reason, as technology has changed everything else in our world, the very fundamental building block of everything, this notion of demographic stereotypes, demographic profiles, people call them personas or, customer profiles, or there's all kinds of different names for them. It's all based on this presumption that people who are somewhat similar to each other based on external appearances or gender or rank in society, that somehow they're all going to behave in a similar way. So what we need to do is shift this. We need to disrupt demographics. We need to stop talking about what people are and focus instead on who people are, and that we can build a world where everything begins, instead of with these divisive conversations about demographic stereotypes, we can now talk about the values that we share across the demographics, the groups of people, the clusters, the tribes, if you will, that we now have in this data set that show how similar we really are to each other. Much more accurate representation of the world today. Boy, I'm chatty. I'm in a chatty mood. You have to jump in and cut me off. No, I'll just keep going.
I mean, just hearing you talk, Dave, it brought me straight away. I need to think about your book. We Are All the Same Now. Was it We Are All the Same Age Now? Valuegraphics and the End of the Demographic Stereotype. So presumably you're going to explore many of the topics you've just talked about there. But what are the key messages in that book?
Well, the key messages in that book, I mean, we started the title, We Are All the Same Age Now, was deliberately chosen because most people can jump on that bandwagon pretty easy and go, yeah, you know what? I don't feel like a 60-year-old. Stop treating me like a 60-year-old. Everybody's cool with that. But as soon as we start trying to say, we're all the same everything now, people's heads start to explode. So we had to have a point of entry. So we used age. Yeah. But in fact, income, gender, marital status, number of kids, education, job title, none of that stuff helps us understand who who they are and how they're going to behave anymore. So that's what the book was about. When I wrote that book a year and a half ago, we only, in air quotes, had 75,000 surveys in the data set. So we were only accurate for Canada and the United States. Well, now, since then, we've collected the rest of the data we need to be statistically representative for 9 regions of the world, which encompass 180 countries. So pretty much anywhere in the world, for any product or service or brand, this data set will tell us what those people care about. And if we build things for what people care about, then they'll be interested in that. Far more so than if we build things for what we think demographic stereotypes care about. And just close that loop. So the new book, I'm in the middle of working on that right now. We're all in lockdown in this terribly confusing and horrible period of history called a global pandemic. Who knew that those two words in a sentence would ever come in handy for real? But here we are. So I'm working on the next book, which is based on the entire global data set. And one of the things I'm most excited about in there is we have figured out a way to include a short quiz. It'll only be 15 questions long. And what it will do is allow anybody who has the book to administer those questions through SurveyMonkey or whatever app they want to use to their customers or to their sales force or to their employees, any group of people that they want to understand. And the responses they get will point them to one of 15 chapters in the book. And that chapter will be about one of the 15 most powerful archetypes that we found in the global data. So it's not going to be really super precise. I say it's like playing the piano with your fists. But at least you're playing the piano. You'll find out which of these 15 super groups your audience is most alike. And then that chapter will just tell you everything we know about that group, because back to the Robin Hood strategy, this is not about me hoarding this information. I do need to pay my mortgage. I want to make a buck. But this is about the world needing to shift and change the way it thinks. We need to stop thinking about each other in the old-fashioned ways from olden days. We quite literally need to change the way we look at the world. And I'm on a mission to get values thinking in everybody's heads and hearts as a better way forward for all of us to make decisions about anything that we're doing for each other.
And if there are any upsides at all to this global pandemic, with the awful pandemic that we're all battling at the moment, it seems to be that people are starting to think differently, work differently, and live differently. I mean, already we've got people all over the world working remotely at scale and starting to question the old way of doing things. And do we really need this many meetings during a day? Because we've lasted 3 months without them.
Yeah.
And your work seems to amplify that global shift away from outdated demographic ideas. But I've got to ask, how much of a game changer do you think that mindset change is going to be for businesses, and how many are actually going to grasp that?
Well, as with any big kind of enormous shift in the way people think about things, it's going to take time, and it'll start with a certain kind of person who's most apt and interested in new ideas. But I know we can do this because we all started wearing seatbelts, and we all decided that smoking was not cool. And we can all change the way we do things and think about things. We can do it. We've proven it. And so the idea that we're inherently a discriminatory society because we begin every conversation with some kind of sorting, like from Harry Potter, where the first thing we talk about is it men, women, rich, poor, young, old, black, white. How do we push people apart into groups so that we understand how to target them? It's an inherently discriminatory, divisive conversation. So instead, if we can have conversations that are about what do these people share in common? What do they all agree on? What do they care about more than anything in the world? And let's build things for that. Then I think the whole world will end up being a far less divisive, angry, polarized place if everything in it starts from a place of unity instead of a place of divisiveness. So it's a big idea. Your question, how long is this going to take? It's not going to happen overnight. But it's pretty hard to argue with the data. When it's data, it's not a philosophy. I'm not standing here on the mountain saying, I have an idea. I'm standing here and saying, I have proof. Demographics are ridiculous, and values are the way for us to move forward.
And there is a lot of doom and gloom and uncertainty out there at the moment. So I'd like this podcast to try and be an antidote to that. So what excites you about the future, and especially a future built on a new mindset and emerging technologies? Because there's a lot to go out there, isn't there?
You know what? This is an amazing moment for us to have this conversation, because there are so many great examples right now that are top of mind of people using values as a way to decide things. It started for me when I saw that the LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy Group, had rededicated all of their perfume factories to making hand sanitizer for the hospitals in France, with the ugliest label and the worst looking bottle I've ever seen in my life, which I've got an open offer for anybody who can find me an empty one of those. I need one for my collection. I'll find a way to make it worth your while if you can get me one of those. Empty though. I don't want to be taking hand sanitizer away from people who need it. But I saw this morning that Chanel has announced that they're going to be making face masks. And I see companies all over the world, not just the big luxury companies, but restaurants here in the town where I live in who have just suddenly converted to kitchens where they're feeding whoever needs to be fed. There's just so much love and so much focus on what's important right now. I think even just in small ways, look at the way you and I began our interview today. We didn't dive right into business. We talked about how are you doing? Are you safe? Where are you spending your time? Is your isolation going okay? Every conversation I have with people right now, it starts with this very personal exchange of story that it's about what's most important. We've realized, we've reprioritized that there's certain things that are more important than business, certain things that are more important than meeting my schedule and than commerce and profits. I'll give you one last story that's really beautiful because I'm so proud of the people here in my town. I live in, as I mentioned earlier, Vancouver in Canada, and I live in the top of a tower right downtown, surrounded by all these other towers. And normally it's a fairly anonymous existence. You see others people's windows who are, half a block away. I'm staring at them out the window right now as I talk to you. There's also about 3 blocks from here, a hospital. And at 7:00 every night is shift change at the hospital. And for the last 3 weeks, every night at 7:00, the entire downtown peninsula in Vancouver goes to their windows and their balconies and applauds.
Wow.
And it's a beautiful thing to see in this city full of otherwise anonymous, busy, hustling folks who are, getting to and from work and dealing with their lives, to stop and applaud simultaneously. People they'll never meet. Hopefully they'll never meet. I hope they don't end up in the hospital. But there's a value on display there. This is the way the world could be if we used values as a way to make our decisions. Let's get rid of the virus, but let's keep a lot of this new way that we're thinking about each other and how we interact and what's important and what's not.
And I think you've already answered this now. It's a beautiful speech that you've just made. But for any business leader listening anywhere in the world, what advice would you offer that traditional business leader about how they should think about adapting to that new world? Because like you said, we've got over here in the UK, there's Brewdog, a big brewer of beer, that are also making hand sanitizer, and Formula One are making ventilators at the moment. There seems to be this huge shift. And on the flip side of that, you've got traditional billionaires. I don't want to name drop too many people, but we do have the Richard Bransons and the Philip Greens over here in the UK that are getting a bad name for themselves for sticking to the former narrative. So how can businesses adapt, do you think?
Well, again, it takes an enormous shift in mindset and an understanding that people are not what they appear to be, and that people are who they are. That's the fundamental core difference here. If I could leave leaders of any kind, political, business, religious, community leaders, with one thought, it's that as we come out of this, think about how powerful all these moves have been, all these different organizations and individuals who've done something based on values, based on something what people care about. Now, the root cause has been horrific, but what if we could keep that ability to think beyond the old ways where a root cause wasn't horrific? What if we could just behave this way because we're humans, and because the world would be a better place if we all just behaved this way, not in response to an emergency, but just in response to daily ritual and daily life? It could be a very, very powerful new way of approaching our lives and our days. On a practical level, I think the best thing that a leader of any sort can do is just grab whatever documentation you have that's a profile of your target audience or your workforce and rip it up into the tiniest little pieces you possibly can and throw it out the window. Or no, don't do that. That's littering. Put it in a recycling bin. And instead, just start looking around at the people you're trying to do things with and do things for, and understand what they care about, and stop trying to put them into buckets based on age or gender or income or marital status, and start putting them into buckets based on, these are family people. These folks over here are experience junkies. These are adventure seekers over here. These folks over here, they're all about loyalty. And these folks over here, they're kind of a crossover group, and they've also got a little streak of personal growth in them. That's how we're going to understand what we can be doing better, using values thinking as a way to serve these folks better. We've identified 56 different core human values in our research around the world. We started with a list of 40 that is sort of the generally accepted list of the 40 core human values that is used by social scientists around the World Values Index, the Bhutan Gross Domestic Happiness Index, some of these different kinds of social science tools. But since no one's ever done a study as exhaustive as ours, we've been able to add to that list. And we've come up with another 16 values that don't even appear on the accepted list. And I have one beautiful little story to share about that. These values come up because people keep saying things to us over and over and over that don't fit into one of those other 40 pre-existing categories. And so we've got these 9 regions of the world, and one of the ways we've been slicing the data is to see what's the top 10 most important things to each of these 9 regions of the world, and how are they different from each other. So in the United States, the number one most important value to everybody in the country is belongingness. They just want to feel like they belong. They don't want to feel like they're left out. They don't want to feel like they're not part of what's going on. So leaders there need to be very focused on saying, we're all in this together. It's why, some of those of us who are not American, we sometimes raise an eyebrow when we hear things like, we are American and we will get through this together. That resonates there because of this value around belongingness. I can't imagine people in the Czech Republic saying that to each other. It wouldn't ring true. Another part of the world, though, in contrast, is the Middle East. And I think so many times people tend to put these two groups at polar ends of some kind of an index and say you couldn't find people more different from each other. And in the Middle East, the number one most important value next to family is morality. And I was lucky, I got to go and speak in I did a little speaking tour in the Middle East last October. And I would get off stage. When you get off stage, there's always a group of people want to come over and shake your hand and have a little chat. And I had women coming up to me wearing burqas who I will never see anything about them other than their eyes, and men in full traditional dish dash wear, or costumes, dish dash is what they're called. And they would come up to me and say, you pinned it, you got it. Morality is what we're all about. From a very, very young age, we're taught that getting to the right place in the right way is more important than anything. That doing right by each other is absolutely fundamental to the way we view the world. So good on you. You got it together. And I would get back into my room and think about this and go, it's kind of a form of belongingness.
Yeah.
There we are with that interconnectivity again. It's a different lens. But in the United States, their deep-rooted value of belonging, and in the Middle East, this deep-rooted value of doing right by each other, are kind of the same thing when you think about it. They have a very similar outcome anyway, which is that we can all change the way we look at the world, and we can all be better off for it. And maybe that's a good place to end.
Man, it's a beautiful place to end, a beautiful point. And for anyone listening that'd like to carry on that conversation and ask you a question or find out more information, read your book, what's the best place to find you online?
Well, my website is valuegraphics.com, and Valuegraphics, just like demographics, one word, the word value. And yes, there is an E, everybody always asks. But I'm not shy. I am a bit of a evangelist for values thinking. So I'm all over social media and Google. And I guess my home base is probably LinkedIn. If you just Google David Allison or Valuegraphics you'll end up on LinkedIn or on my website. And I'd be thrilled to talk to any of you that want to have this conversation. It's a passion. It's driving 14-hour, 15-hour days. And gosh darn it, we're going to get the world thinking about values instead of demographic stereotypes. And it's going to happen. I'm going to make this happen.
Absolutely. And what I'd love to do is, on the other side of the global pandemic, I'd like to try and keep this spirit alive that we've all got now and get you back on the podcast and see how we can harness some of that energy and see where we're heading and the kind of conversations you've been having as well. So I'd love to get you back on the podcast, but more than anything, just a big thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to come back anytime you want.
Wow. David literally blew me away with his findings today. It's not just his philosophy, and you can't even call it a philosophy because it's actually backed up by data, everything that he said there. And technology is proving we all have so much more in common with one another wherever everybody listens in the world than many other people would like us to believe. And the fact that you're all listening to this podcast in 165 countries also proves that point too. and that none of us fit into those stereotypes left over from the analogue days. We're now living in a digital age, and that old rule book needs to be torn up, and let's try something different. And I have said repeatedly over the last few weeks that if any good at all could possibly come from this global pandemic, it's that we all start questioning things, thinking differently, and value the important things in life over just buying more stuff. But hey, before I get on my soapbox again, over to you. I've said my piece. The guest, David, has shared his story, but now I turn the virtual microphone over to you. Please share your insights, expertise, thoughts, questions, whatever it is, by emailing me directly, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, Instagram Neil C. Hughes, LinkedIn Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. There you are. There's a myriad of channels for you to reach me, and I'm interested in what you all come back with. But now I'm going to prepare for tomorrow's interview, who I've already got lined up for you, and I'm quite excited about that one too. I do get excited easily, don't I? But a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.